All right, let's discuss government's state of preparedness for such disasters and the resilience of the country's infrastructure. To help us understand this is Professor Hope Magidimisha-Chipungu, who joins us via the virtual platform. Prof, good evening to you, and thank you very much for your time. Do you think government is prepared for these kinds of weather events? Every time they come along, it just seems as though there is a state of helplessness.
Yeah, good evening to you and to all your viewers. I think you are right. It's very concerning that every time we are always found wanting, and we now know, and evidence is in front of us, that the issue around the climate change is here to stay. It's actually our next common normal, is our new normal that we need to get used to. But when it comes to the state of the preparedness, that's where we are lacking. I think we are spending a lot of time and resources investing on post-disaster management or recovery. Once the disaster hit, we try to find solutions, which we have to, and try to rescue people. But very little is being done in terms of preparing and making sure that at least before the disaster hits, we are prepared and we're able to minimize that. And this has been seen by a case in question that you're talking about for Otongate, which if you go and drive around Otongate, you will realize that it's generally a wet area and the infrastructure is not in very good condition, especially the drainage system in Otongate. And those are the issues that one would have expected that at least they would have been taken care of, and especially the areas which are highly affected in Otongate are those ones mostly, we consider them to be informal settlements, and we do know the materials which are used to build those houses. So we are at a very compromised position as a country.
A little earlier, Professor, I spoke to an official from the Presidential Climate Commission, Mr. Desigan Naidu, and I can say this now with a bit of authority because these were his words, that the criticism that government just is not prepared for this, and they actually should be blamed now because he himself admitted that over the past 10 years, every year, particularly in the province of KwaZulu-Natal, they are confronted with the same weather events. And by now, there should have been some kind of mechanism, not only to predict, but to also better prepare. If there is such an admission, what should the government, or where should government be in preparing for these kinds of weather events?
Yeah, there are three levels of preparedness that South Africa needs to pay attention. And so far, we have been paying attention to the latter, which is mostly the one around post-disaster recovery. But we need to work on the mitigation strategies before the disaster happened, and what happened during this disaster when nobody is there, when the city officials are at home sleeping because it's in the evening. How do people respond? And I think those are the areas that we need to focus on. When we're looking at the mitigation strategies around the pre-disaster taking place, we're looking at how do we actually design our cities. That is very key. And how do we do land use management? Now, if you look at what's happening in Otongate, you will realize that most of the houses, obviously there is informal settlement, so obviously they're not approved by the municipalities. But why? How did we get here? How did we get to a position where we have so many mushrooming of informal settlement and nobody's saying anything about it? What is exactly the plan of South Africa in dealing with informal settlement? Because we do know for sure, factually, that whether we like it or not, people who are living in the informal settlement, they are the ones who are hit the most when such things happen. So what are we doing? So we need to come up with the plans to deal with the informal settlement, because that is the area which is compromised. Now, the other issue we need to look at is the issue around the green infrastructure that we need to do. And urban planners are well trained to look into this area to say, when we are designing our areas, we have to make sure that we accommodate issues around green infrastructure, which is happening to some degree, but not enough to make any impact. Then the other issue that we also need to be looking at in South Africa and this is across the board, is the issue around maintaining our infrastructure. I did mention earlier on that if you go to Otongati now, you can easily see, I was there this afternoon, you can easily see areas within Otongati that actually the drainage system is not moving, and that makes it the area already wet. So once you have area which is always wet and you have more rains coming, that makes it even more catastrophic. So those are some of the issues that we need to look at it. But the one which we need to also pay attention to is the issue around public awareness. We are saying very little about what is the responsibilities of the communities themselves. What is it that they need to do in order to assist us to make sure that we manage and prepare ourselves for disaster? And the same way that we used to advertise and talk about the HIV/AIDS, and we're trying to make sure that people are aware and they know what action to take once they're affected, is the very same way in which we need to advertise and talk and raise awareness around the issue of climate change, which is not happening enough.
Yeah.
We talk about it when this crisis.
Professor, let's talk about what are those few steps that people ought to take when they become aware that a tornado is approaching. What are the safety precautions that we ought to take?
Yeah, so there are a number of issues that we need to be mindful of. And of course, experts in issues around safety, they may have even be having more detailed measures. But one that comes to mind is that you cannot be up and down when you realize that there's a tornado coming. Now, you will realize that it can happen when you're in the middle of nowhere, when you're driving your car. What do you do when in that situation? So you may not know exactly where to go to, but who do you talk to assist you in order to come out of that situation? Most South Africans, if you ask them to say, if you are in a disaster now in your area, who do you talk to and how do you reach to them? And that's if you are able to reach. But how do you also help one another? So we need to create an environment where we're able to assist one another. So in other words, I'm advocating for what we call a community champions that we need to have in almost every areas where if there's a disaster like this, that person become a point of contact and we're able to connect. So there are many other measures that you need to take, but they will depend on where we are. That's why the issue of awareness and education become keys so that we break this down into small pieces and people, they understand their responsibilities.
Yeah, and important there is saving lives, because that's the point of communicating so that people are better prepared. Professor, thank you very much for your time. Professor Hope Magidimisha-Chipungu, she's attached to the University of KwaZulu-Natal.